everyone, welcome to Armed and Fabulous with Lauren Liberty. So for those of you that aren't really familiar with the show yet, it's a pretty new podcast, and the goal is to create a space for us to discuss women and gun issues. As I mentioned during the intro with Mark and Andy, most people have a woman in their life, whether it's a sister, a friend, your mom, and I can almost guarantee at one point she's probably been in a situation where she was like, wow, I may be unprepared to defend myself. So I just wanted to create a platform for women to have a space in the Second Amendment community. Today we are going to be talking with one of our attorneys here with the Attorneys for Freedom law firm, Rachel Moss. Hey Rachel, how are you?
Hi. I'm so excited to be here today. I've always been a big Second Amendment person, and I'm really excited to talk about some interesting issues in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'm so happy to have you here. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, maybe where you came from, how you ended up here at Attorneys for Freedom?
Definitely. So I actually grew up on the East Coast, so a little bit far away. And when I was in college, I made the decision to go to law school. It was a super last minute decision. I took a legal class by accident in college, and it ended up being my favorite class. And so I kind of thought, okay, if this is my favorite class I've ever taken in college, more than all of my other actual major classes, maybe I should get into law. And so I made a very last minute decision to apply to law school. Like I was applying for law schools like during my senior year of college. Got accepted into Arizona State, and I only applied to Arizona State because they waived the application fee. I had no interest in actually moving to Arizona because I was kind of afraid of the heat.
It's pretty gnarly.
Yeah. So I ended up getting accepted to ASU, and again, I was just going to ignore it. I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. I got accepted. But after that, they offered to fly me out to their campus, and I was like, okay, I'll take a free trip to Arizona. Like, sure, I'll enjoy a hotel, a pool day, all of that. And I flew out, and I instantly fell in love with ASU, everything about it. And I said, I'll get over the heat. I'll move to Arizona. During my second year of law school, that's when I first saw an ad for Attorneys for Freedom. And I was super excited because, believe it or not, freedom principles are not really embraced in law school. You know, the place where you go to learn about laws, learn about the freedoms and rights we have in the United States, they're not always embraced. And it was really exciting to see something like Attorneys for Freedom. And I still haven't told Mark this personally, but when I saw the very first ad for Attorneys for Freedom, I said, I will be an attorney there one day. I was just, in my second year of law school, but I said, I will be an attorney there one day. And I've never even said something like that. I've never been that type of person to just say, I will make this happen. But I decided to. I applied to be a law clerk. Obviously, things happened from there.
Got a little out of hand. Now you're an attorney.
As I'm sitting at the table, and clerking for them was such a great experience. As people who may be familiar with Andy and Mark know, they are so knowledgeable. If you've ever watched any of the AOR videos, they know so much about self-defense. They know so much about the law in general. It was great to learn from them. And so I've really enjoyed working at Attorneys for Freedom the past couple of years, and recently getting a little more involved with some of their, the Attorneys on Retainer program and some other aspects of the firm.
That's awesome. It seems like fate almost brought you here, right? For me, I'm originally from New York, so I'm also from the East Coast. I lived in Florida for a little while, and then I met my husband on Facebook.
Okay.
And he was going to ASU out here, and that's how I ended up here as well. And it's funny because I knew Mark before working here from the Freedom crowd, right? And I worked at a different law firm previously, and there was another paralegal there, and he said, my goal is to work at the Attorneys for Freedom law firm. At that point, it became my goal as well. So I kind of had a similar moment where I was like, that's where I want to be. I think that's going to be a really great fit, and they're going to be like-minded people. Being from the East Coast, you said Virginia, correct?
Yes.
So that is very different than New York. For me, I grew up, I didn't really have guns around. I was in the suburbs of New York City, and their gun laws are really, really strict, and it's just not really a way of life there. Maybe upstate New York's a little bit different. Should probably be a whole different state, honestly. So I actually didn't grow up around guns. Did you have a similar experience?
Virginia is actually a little similar, where I grew up in Northern Virginia, which is way different political leanings, way different thoughts on guns than Southern Virginia. Again, I agree with you that it's definitely a two state in one type of situation living in Virginia. But I actually grew up around guns because my grandfather is from Illinois, and we would go visit him there every single year. And, Illinois isn't the kindest on gun laws either, but a big difference is Illinois and, the farmland, there's definitely a little more, freedom with your firearms. And so we would go every year to Illinois. And when we would go, I remember at a very young age, I think it was like 4 or 5 years old, my grandfather showed me his guns and he wanted me to understand what they were. And I think that's very, very important to know from a young age. I know a lot of people take the position that maybe it's better to wait to expose children to guns. But I think because I was exposed at a young age, it gave me a deeper understanding of gun safety. You learn those 4 rules from a young age, the 4 classic rules of gun safety. The most common one being always treat your gun as if it's loaded, things like that. If you are learning that from a young age, they will stick with you. If you're practicing those habits from age 4, you're way more likely to be a responsible gun owner at, age, let's err on the side of a stricter state 21 than you would be if you were a 21-year-old learning those rules for the first time and practicing those rules for the first time. I thought that was very useful. And he taught me about the importance that guns are tools. They can be used for self-defense, they can be used for hunting, but also that there's some recreation to be had with guns. You can go clay shooting, you can do target shooting, and it's not wrong for that to be fun. And so I remember back when I think I was 5, he took me and my brother outside and he showed us this ledge that he had lined up with a bunch of little tin cans. He never ate canned food, so still have no idea where those cans came from. But he took us out, showed us these cans, and he sat us on his lap and really helped us learn how to shoot a firearm at that age. I was shooting growing up with him, and it really helped me, learn to be not comfortable where I was, being too relaxed with firearms,
Sure.
but comfortable in that I knew how to use them and I wasn't afraid to use them properly.
I think that fear and that lack of knowledge is really what makes a lot of people almost afraid to even pick up a firearm in the first place, right? To your point, I really love that they got you started at such a young age, because now that I have a child of my own, I see that anytime I tell him not to touch something, he wants to touch it even more, right? So if you sort of remove that mystery and just make it a normalized thing and just give them an excellent understanding that this is not a toy, your basic safety rules, keep it out of reach, I think that there is nothing wrong with teaching from a young age.
Oh yeah, and I completely agree. And something I wanted to share is that, there was a period of a few years where I wasn't shooting as often. And I like to bring this up because I think something intimidating to many women who want to get into shooting is there's something that kind of feels like a little embarrassing to be older and not know how to shoot guns. And I realized after a few years of not shooting, I was rusty. I forgot things. So right now I take lessons. I go to an instructor so I can sharpen up and get better again. And there's no shame in admitting you need a class or you need an instructor. It's much safer to take that route of really being comfortable with your firearm before carrying than just going out and saying, okay, I want to jump into this community. So I encourage women that are, wanting to be first-time gun owners or wanting to shoot a gun for the first time, don't be afraid to find an instructor. And it's actually fairly affordable, to find classes and to find instructors that are willing to work with you. Go to the range, practice. It's worth it to be safe.
Absolutely. I mean, it's cliche, but practice makes perfect, right? I mean, even the greatest shooters in the world, I'm sure there's something that they could learn. And that's kind of something that I love about this as a sport and as a hobby is that it's always changing, right? There's always new accessories, new things coming out, new models of firearms coming out, and also new techniques. For me, being from New York and not growing up around guns, I think the first time I did fire a weapon was... I was probably 25. So I was a little bit older. Yeah. And it wasn't actually until I moved to Florida. And that was when I fell in love with it immediately. I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. This is so much fun. And I didn't immediately start carrying on my person just because I wanted to learn more about the ins and outs of how to handle a firearm, what type of situation would warrant it, right? That comes up a lot, I'm sure, for you as a criminal defense attorney. I completely agree. There's no shame in bettering yourself. You can always be better, do better. And even if it's not just your aim, right? There's so many things like situational awareness. We had that situation at the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl celebration parade where there was a bunch of people that pulled out their guns and started shooting at each other in a huge crowd of people. That is absolutely horrific to even imagine doing into an innocent crowd of people.
Exactly. And I'll say first, I'm no expert on Missouri law, but when it comes to Arizona, even if you're acting in valid self-defense, you can still be held liable if you irresponsibly shoot someone else in the process of defending yourself. That's something you can still face a criminal charge for. So it's a difficult analysis when you're in that situation, and I think that goes back to one of the classic rules of gun safety as well. Know your target, what's before it, what's beyond it. And that's important in situations like we see in this shooting, because based on the news that's come out so far, it seems like the victim that was not an intended target, was not someone threatening. And so that's why if you choose to exercise self-defense, you have to be prepared that if you were to make a mistake in that self-defense action, if you are to shoot someone else, you can face criminal charges for that. And I think that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah. And I think the only way to prepare for that is to practice and to train, right? And there's also the fight, flight, run, freeze, I think is the third one. Fight, flight, and freeze. You can practice shooting in a controlled environment all day, right? You're at the range, you're plinking away, no problem. Your aim is completely straight on. But when you add that adrenaline and your hands are shaking and you have a crowd of people and you have to decide what is the best course of action here, I think the only way to really even have any understanding of how you might react, because a lot of people would probably be surprised by how they call it the lizard brain, right? The lizard brain takes over and you just go on this autopilot, basically. So the only way is to train for that, is to put yourself, they actually have certain classes where it's a high stress situation. They have all of these factors. They have people coming in as actors and, some people are friendly, some people are just innocent bystanders, some people are the bad guy, whatever. And you have to really train for that because you never know.
Yeah, and exactly. I was reading, this article about the shooting, and I saw in here the person that first shot said that the reason he shot is he felt threatened. So as a criminal defense attorney, that's a good step one to say someone felt threatened. At
Checklist,
least
right?
You can get a self-defense claim out there. But he said the reason he felt threatened is because the other person said, "I'm going to get you," which he took as "I'm going to kill you." I find that to be a harder sell, especially when you consider the fact that in most self-defense situations, most states require some sort of imminent threat to your life in order to exercise self-defense. And is saying "I'm going to get you" alone imminent? I think that's difficult. I think his defense attorney can definitely argue it. I think he can argue that he interpreted that as "I'm going to get you right now." But he didn't say the guy said "I'm going to get you right now."
That's an excellent point. Wow. I didn't even think about that. And I'm sure there are plenty of situations where it may have been a legitimate self-defense situation, but that sort of gray area, right, between the imminent threat. How does one decide what's an imminent threat? Is there like a legal threshold on that, or?
I think that's difficult. Well, because in Arizona, at least, a jury is the person that's going to make the decision in your case. And they have to consider all facts and evidence, circumstances available to them to make that decision. And in Arizona, they have to decide what would a reasonable person have done in your situation. So they get to decide would a reasonable person have found that imminent. And I think there's actually some other things he said that are kind of helpful for the analysis. Another thing the shooter said is that when deciding to defend himself, he picked someone out of the other group from random. So it was a whole, it was a whole nother group that he was in fear of. And he said he picked someone from random. Even though I'm a criminal defense attorney, if I'm pretending I'm the prosecutor right now, I'm going to say, how was it imminent if you picked someone from random? Because that's showing you didn't really do an analysis of, is someone actually threatening me right now? You just see a big group and say, I'm scared of this group, I'll pick one. I think he gave his defense attorney a hard job by making that statement. Again, that's why we say just shut up.
Yep.
But he had a kind of a stronger claim until he threw that out there.
Oh my gosh, that is so scary. And the crazy thing about this is that there were, I've seen a couple of numbers thrown around, but at least 800 police officers in the area too. It's a tragedy, right? It should never have happened. I think with better training, better understanding of situational awareness, this never should have happened.
Exactly. And I think that's a good point that you mentioned that the officers were around. And that's probably something that prosecutors, defense attorneys, investigators are going to look into. Was an officer nearby where he could have just said, "Hey, officer, I need some help." That could have solved the situation potentially. When you look at the situation here, in this article, it mentions that the Chiefs Parade shooting could be a new test of the expanded stand your ground protection. And I always like to talk about there's kind of a difference between legally, what the law says, and practical, what might actually happen if you get charged with an offense. And stand your ground typically means you have no duty to retreat. You're not required to retreat. However, a jury's still going to look and decide at what was reasonable. So even though the law might say you have no duty to retreat, a jury might think a reasonable person may not have shot if they knew there was another way out. And that, again, kind of goes to how imminency and retreating tie in together. They're kind of related, but they're also separate. And I think it makes a difficult analysis. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a jury of your peers. And I always tell people, imagine your peers. This could be your friend, your family member, your uncle. It could be your favorite politician, your least favorite politician on your jury. Think through all the beliefs of those types of people and think, are they going to follow the law in the way you want them to?
Right. Are they going to interpret it the same way that you would? That's excellent advice. During your tenure here at the firm, have you done a lot of cases involving firearms? So for those of you that don't know, I did start out at the front desk here as a receptionist, and I worked my way up. And I remember we had a lot of clients that were coming in with the ATF ruling for the WATs and the FRTs. And I know that we've actually done quite a bit of like gun rights restorations. Have you done a lot of like firearms related cases?
Yeah, I've worked on tons of firearm related cases, basically in all the areas you just described.
I remember booking a lot of them with you, so yeah. I kind of knew the answer to that question. But.
Yeah, so I've gotten to work on a lot of firearms cases, and I really enjoy them, especially what you just touched on, firearm rights restoration, because there's individuals that lose their firearm over something they did when they were a kid. And I know when sometimes people get nervous when you say firearm rights restoration because they think, okay, this guy did something crazy and now he's getting a gun back. But you think back to something you did when you were 20 years old. Do we really want to strip that person of their Second Amendment right for their entire life? And so I love getting to see these people that, maybe they did something wrong. They made a mistake years ago, but we get to help them get those rights back and show the court that they've earned it, that they're a citizen that is law-abiding and will be responsible with their firearm.
I love that. Rights restoration is something that I'm also a huge fan of because especially non-violent offenses, right? It's kind of crazy. And I actually testified in favor of a bill that would automatically restore the rights to people, whatever the terms of their sentencing were completed. It would actually place the burden on the state to automatically do it and not wait for this person to initiate the process and have to spend, how much money with an attorney to guide them through the process. I think that bill unfortunately died and was never passed. But encouraging to see stuff like this even moving through the legislature.
Well, actually, it was a new change pretty recently that in Arizona, you can get your firearm rights back if you've completed your sentence if you're a first-time offender. For first-time offenders, I think that's great. You get your firearm rights automatically restored once you finish your sentence. I think that's great because we're acknowledging you did the crime. As they say, you did the crime, you did the time.
Yeah.
And you successfully completed your sentence. Why shouldn't we reward that? Because the whole idea of probation in Arizona is to rehabilitate people. The whole idea of going to prison is to also have a rehabilitative element to that. So if we're not willing to give people their rights back, are we also saying our programs don't really work? That's the thing. I think that shows that if we're allowing people to get their rights back at the end, we're showing that we actually have confidence in our system, which is, I think, what we all really want.
100%. Absolutely. Yes. You want to know that whatever rehabilitation that's supposed to be going on is actually working and this person can re-assimilate into normal lifestyle. That's an excellent point. With Mark and Andy, when they introed the show, we talked a little bit about my experience that was really kind of a scary wake-up call and made me a little bit more aware of how dangerous it is to be in a gun-free zone. And I know I've met so many women through the Women for Gun Rights organization that have had some experience that really stood out in their mind. It was really a wake-up call to them. Is there anything you'd be comfortable sharing?
Yeah, definitely. And I want to say that when I saw your story first in that, I think, famous viral video you had where you shared that story, and it resonated with me, and I think it resonates with a lot of women. My story that I would say is not as extreme by any means as what you went through.
That doesn't make it any less valid. Any story is worth hearing.
But kind of reminded me of that same feeling you had. Is back when I was in college, I went to college in Virginia. I actually wanted to carry a gun when I went to college, and I did research, and I found out, we didn't really have a strong, campus carry protection. If you remember, there was that kind of infamous Virginia Tech shooting a couple years before I was in college, and, multiple people died on campus. And that was actually one of the reasons I wanted to carry. Some people look in that and say, hey, look, if there had been no guns on campus, that wouldn't have happened. But I looked at it as college is a vulnerable place where I want to be able to protect myself. I don't want to lose my Second Amendment right just because I decided to go get an education. So I wanted to be able to defend myself. But based on the research at my campus, you could carry on a public walkway or green, but not in a dorm, not in a classroom building or any actual campus building. So effectively, you didn't have the right to carry a gun because, if I'm walking to class and I have a gun, it doesn't magically disappear when I walk into the building.
Right.
So I knew I couldn't carry a gun on campus. I remembered there was this one night where I went to a friend's house. It was actually an off-campus condo. We were going to watch the Republican national primary debate. So that's right. I was really cool. And so we went to go watch this debate, and afterwards I decided, I was just going to walk to the bus stop. It was a 4-minute walk, and I know some people say you should never walk alone at night. Probably good advice, but I was in college. I didn't even think about it.
You
I was
still
like,
have to live your life, right?
Yeah, I was like, it's a 4-minute walk to the bus stop. It's nighttime. Who cares? Back in college, it goes straight from the bus stop, drops me right off in front of the dorm. So easy. So I didn't even think anything of it. So I was walking from my friend's condo to the bus stop, and when I was about 1 minute away, I saw this woman running across her front lawn, and she was screaming for help. She was screaming, help me, he's hurting me, I can't get away. And I turn and I see this woman. Right behind her is this man running after her, and he's trying to grab her. I just look at it and I'm surprised, and she continues to scream help. So before I even knew it, I didn't even think about it. I was between them. I was pushing him off of her as he was grabbing her, and I had to push him away. And he continued trying to yell. She was yelling at him to get away, and he continued trying to grab her around me. So I had to, stay in between them, make sure he couldn't get to her. She was a really small girl. This guy was bigger than me in this situation, but I knew I couldn't leave this girl alone. And during the encounter, at one point he tried to take a swing. Luckily, he was not a good fighter. He missed. He missed, but at the same time, that didn't bring comfort to me. Luckily, at that time, right after he took a swing, a group of people walked around the corner, and it was a group of 2 women, 2 men, much larger than him, and he kind of knew it was over at that point. They began yelling at him, saying, back off, we're calling 911. The police were called and everything. I was able to leave the scene. Even though I left, I had absolutely no injuries, whatsoever. He never touched me. I was able to get, the woman away from him. She was fine in the end. It left me shaken. I was afraid after that, and I was feeling the effects of that for a while. I looked back at that, and I know that's not a situation where I would have pulled out a firearm yet. Mm-hmm. At that point, I wouldn't have pulled out a firearm, but it could have escalated to that point. Mm-hmm. It really could have. I really thought about that, and that made me passionate about getting involved in something I always think about. There's people that will look at my story and say, well, you just proved the point of why people don't need firearms because you were fine. It was able to resolve through conversation and non-lethal force. That's true. That's how it resolved. But I think people fail to miss this very, very simple aspect that I'm able to tell my story because I'm alive. Mm-hmm. There are many women that are in situations in gun-free zones, in areas where you cannot carry a firearm, that are not here to tell their stories today. And that's just heartbreaking. And that's why I got involved in Second Amendment issues, and I decided that I would become, somewhat of a campus carry advocate myself. I got involved after that in, signing petitions, getting involved in certain political campaigns, doing research, talking to other advocates. And, there's still a lot of progress in that issue that needs to be made to this day. But it's just like you said, most women have a story like ours. Mm-hmm. And that's crazy to think. Most women have a story like that, where if they had had a firearm, they might have been in a more comfortable or safe position than they otherwise would have been.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a very powerful story because you're right. Had one thing been different about that scenario, she could have been gone, you could have been gone. You just don't know. You really don't know. And you would rather have that protection and not need it than need it and not have it. As much of a trope as that is, it's so true. And having an eye-opening experience like that really makes you appreciate and understand how important it is to be able to protect yourself everywhere you go. Just because you cross over some invisible boundary doesn't mean you should lose your rights to protect yourself, right? Or protect somebody else for that matter. And that's also where training comes in to loop it back around, right? Yeah. It's actually incredible because that story, I had people say the same thing to me, right? Well, you didn't need your gun because you survived. Well, the reason that I survived was because exact same situation, people came walking around the corner and the guy took off and jumped in his car and drove away. So if it weren't for those people, who knows what would have happened? So you really can't bank on that like, oh, well, I got lucky this time, I'll get lucky next time. Like, no, that's not how it works. I need to be sure that I can protect myself.
Exactly. And what I tell women is, don't be ashamed of the fact that we're not stronger than men. Yeah. We're not. Yeah. And I know that can be hard to say for me. I kickbox, I box in my spare time, and I'm pretty good. I would love if we had some, footage of me doing a really impressive kick right now. But I do this in my free time. But even with all of that training, most men that are shorter than me, even most men that I am bigger than, still are stronger than me, still could, beat me in a fight. And I'm not ashamed of the fact that I'm weaker than men. I'm not. It's something that I should acknowledge and should be aware of so I can be safe in the world. And that's exactly why I encourage so many women, to get involved with firearm training and safety, so they know that if they're in a situation, your hands aren't going to do it against a man, They're just not.
Absolutely. Even at my strongest, I know that I could not fight physically. And to the point that you made, the guy that went after me was smaller than me. I'm not a small woman by any means, and he was smaller than me, and he was dragging me. I was so shocked when that happened. I almost was like, is this really happening? I never imagined something like that would play out in that manner. So thank you for sharing that. That's a really incredible story, and thank you for being willing to stick up for somebody else, because so many people would just walk by and they would say, it's not my problem, which is their right to do, but it takes a lot of guts to do the right thing in a situation like that. I know that you have also been doing the gun shows. We do the gun shows here in Arizona. I know that you've been speaking there. What's sort of your speech, if you can give like a little quick rundown?
Well, actually, I share a little bit of what I've shared today. I start by telling a little bit about my story. I think it's good for people to hear that. And especially at these gun shows, you are seeing more and more women nowadays attending. So I want women to be aware that they're kind of validated in being there, because sometimes as a woman, it's a little intimidating to go to a gun show. Most of the vendors are going to be men. Most of the attendees are still going to be men. So I want women to know it's good that you're here, and it's good that you're trying to obtain more knowledge about self-defense. And from there, I really get into multiple, self-defense aspects. I go over some things that responsible gun owners in Arizona should know. Some of the things we've talked about today, the fact that you need to be aware of any time you pull out your gun, you're risking being convicted of a crime, even if it's a good shoot. If you have the most stunning, perfect self-defense shoot that's ever been recorded in history, it may not actually go down like that in court. An officer may still choose to charge you. A prosecutor may still choose to evaluate you, and you may still be convicted of something. And so anytime you pull out a firearm, you need to be prepared that you could be prosecuted and potentially convicted. So I get into that a little bit in my speech, go into some other self-defense aspects. And I usually like ending with some like hot topics going on in the Second Amendment community. Funny enough, like you mentioned some of them, like FRTs, red flag laws is a big hot topic right now. So things like that.
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, that's incredible. And I think that the only way to know what to expect is to just show up, right? Because it does seem like it's like a mostly men. You would be amazed at how many women show up. And sometimes it might just be somebody's wife and she has no interest, but there's women there. There are kindred spirits there. And any 2A event, any gun show I've ever been to, the men have always been super nice, and they're always super willing to chat about things and approach somebody and open up a dialogue. So it's actually a very welcoming community, and there's all types of people. And that's what I love about the Second Amendment. The Second is for everyone. All peaceful people should have the right to self-defense, and that's really, at the end of the day, that's all it is.
I agree. And, that's why people always say, like, one of the safest places you can be is a gun show. Yeah. When you're somewhere like that, or like a Second Amendment rally where everyone's carrying, you feel pretty protected. Okay, everyone's carrying a firearm, so they know they're going to be careful, because if they pull out their firearm, they're putting themselves at risk. They know
got 100 more people pointing one back at it, right?
Exactly. It's like you never feel safer than in those situations.
Absolutely.
So, Lauren, I wanted to surprise you because, this is called Armed and Fabulous. So I was excited to talk about both the armed and the fabulous portion. If you don't know, Lauren always is just she's such a great dresser, and she'll always, like, even when she's carrying a gun, she'll have a really cool, cute outfit on. I feel like in the Second Amendment community, we get like a stereotype of dressing a certain way, especially women, like wearing the camo pants and an American flag shirt. And I'll wear those outfits. I actually wore that on Saturday.
I love it. No shade.
I'll wear those outfits. But there's more to, you don't have to dress a certain way to be in the Second Amendment community.
You can be super feminine and still carry a giant rifle. I love it.
And so I wanted to show you a picture of something I was thinking about purchasing, because something I always think about as a woman is, how do I want to carry my firearm and still look cute?
Yeah.
And I saw this concealed carry belt bag, which in my day, we just called it a fanny pack. But I wanted to see what you thought of something like that. What are your thoughts on having kind of an alternative way to carry a firearm, like in something like this?
So I love an accessory. Obviously, my outfits will prove that. And I love that there are so many more products to make concealing easier for women. As a woman, our clothes are a lot tighter cut, and it actually is harder to conceal with that stuff. It's also harder you can't carry a full-size pistol. You're kind of limited as to what you can carry. So I love having these options, and I love that it's becoming normalized, and there are so many different vendors producing these types of things. I think it's excellent. I think this one is super cute in particular. I've looked at a couple of them. There have been some that I really liked that I was like, oh, I could see myself using it, and there have been some that I was like, oh, it wouldn't work for me, but maybe it will work for somebody else. I think as long as you practice drawing from that, it's golden. I mean, if it works for you, it's comfortable, and you can draw your weapon effectively, I love it. Why not?
Do you have any other thoughts about what a responsible gun owner should look for in products like this? Because you may not want to just grab any purse off the street, for example.
Sure. So there was one bag that I had looked at in particular, and it had sort of like a pocket, but it didn't have any sort of holster in there. So I would imagine I would still have to keep my firearm in the Kydex holder to protect the trigger, because the gun I carry doesn't have a safety, right? You have to make sure that you're not going to have a negligent discharge, right?
That's a crime.
It sure is. I would say something that has that layer of protection where you know that you're not going to accidentally fire that weapon upon drawing or upon putting it back into the bag. So that would be something that I personally would look for if I were to shop for one of these bags. So if it had some sort of a Kydex or hard plastic type of holster in there that would be safe and contain the actual trigger itself, I think that would be a great buy.
Well, I feel comfortable moving forward with a purchase now that I've talked to Lauren Liberty.
I'll verify it as soon as it comes in.
Okay, I'll have you check it out.
Sounds good. I love that. Well, thank you for bringing the fabulous to the Armed and Fabulous. I had so much fun talking with you today. Thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, it was so much fun, and I'm so excited to see all the future episodes. I know I'm going to be a fan myself.
You're going to be like, first comment.
I feel like I've been the first comment on multiple Lauren Liberty videos. I know there's a few AOR people out there that I'm going to have to fight off, to be your top fan, but I'm going to do it.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Thanks for joining us today on Armed and Fabulous with Lauren Liberty. Make sure to like, subscribe, and click on the bell for notifications. If there's anything that you'd like to see us talk about on the show, be sure to leave a comment and let us know. For more legal advice, be sure to check out attorneysforfreedom.com. And to check out our Attorneys on Retainer self-defense program, visit attorneysonretainer.us. Until next time.